She didn't even look at me when she said it. She was signing something on her desk, and she said it the way you'd tell a valet where to park your car. Fix the greenhouse. If my daughter decides she still wants you after that, I won't stand in the way. I stood there in that foyer with my work boots on the marble floor, and I thought, I didn't say it, but I thought it, lady, I didn't come here to audition. But I didn't leave. That's the part I'm still figuring out. My name is Tucker Greer. I'm 41 years old. I own a small landscaping and grounds maintenance company out of Asheville, North Carolina. Nothing fancy, me, 2 part-time guys, a truck that's paid off, and enough steady work to keep the lights on and my daughter Wren fed. Wren is 9. She likes dinosaurs and hates math, and she is the best thing that ever happened to me without me doing anything to deserve it. Her mom left when Wren was 2. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because it matters to the story. When you raise a kid alone, you stop thinking about yourself in a certain way. You stop being the main character in your own life. You become the guy who makes sure somebody else's life goes okay. That's not a complaint. That's just what it is. I got the call on a Wednesday morning in March. I was trimming hedges at a property on the east side of town when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Area code 82E8, but not a local number I knew. Is this Tucker Greer, the landscaping company? Yes, ma'am. I'm calling on behalf of Vivian Crestwood. She's looking for someone to assess the grounds at her property outside of Weaverville, the greenhouse in particular. Are you available for a consultation this week? I'd heard the name Crestwood. You couldn't live in this part of western North Carolina and not have. The Crestwood family had been building things in this region for 3 generations. Hotels, a vineyard, a private equestrian facility, east of Black Mountain, the kind of money that had its own gravitational pull. I said I was available Thursday afternoon. The property sat off a private road about 7 miles north of Weaverville. I almost missed the turn. There was no mailbox, no sign, just a break in the tree line and a gravel lane that curved out of sight. I followed it for nearly half a mile before the house appeared. I've seen big houses. I've worked on estates in the Biltmore Forest neighborhood where the square footage runs to 6,000 and 7,000 feet and the lawns are measured in acres. But this was different. This wasn't a house that was trying to impress you. It was a house that didn't care whether you were impressed or not. Stone and timber, 3 stories, long horizontal lines, deep covered porches. It sat in the landscape like it had always been there, like the trees had grown up around it on purpose. I parked my truck near the garage, a separate building, large enough for 6 cars, and a woman came out of the main house to meet me. She was in her early 70s, silver-haired, wearing a cream-colored blazer and slacks that probably cost more than my monthly lease on the shop space I used to store equipment. She did not smile. Mr. Greer, yes, ma'am. You must be Mrs. Crestwood. I am. She looked at my truck, then at my boots, then at my face. The greenhouse is this way. She turned and walked and I followed. The greenhouse was set back from the main house, connected by a stone pathway bordered with ornamental grasses that hadn't been tended in a while. The structure itself was maybe 60 feet long and 30 feet wide. Victorian style, cast iron and glass, the kind of thing that costs somewhere north of $200,000 to build right. And it was dying. Half the glass panels were clouded with mineral deposits. The irrigation lines had cracked in at least 2 places I could see from the outside. The heating system. I could tell it ran on a hydronic loop from the boiler I could hear ticking somewhere beneath the floor. Was struggling audibly, like a man walking uphill with bad knees. But the bones were extraordinary. The cast iron framing was original, probably 1920s, and it was sound. The foundation was poured concrete, solid. Whatever had gone wrong here was systems failure, not structural failure. This building wanted to live. How long has it been like this? I asked. 2 years, Vivian said, since my husband passed. I looked at her. She was staring at the greenhouse like she was having a conversation with it that I wasn't part of. He managed all of this himself. Edward was very particular about the greenhouse. He grew things in there. Orchids, mostly, and some kitchen herbs. He had a system for everything. A pause. No one has been able to replicate it. Have you had other contractors out? 3. One told me to tear it down and start over. The second gave me a quote for $400,000 to restore it. The third, she stopped. The third came recommended and did not show up. I crouched down near the base of the east wall and looked at where the irrigation line entered the foundation. The pipe had expanded and cracked at a joint, probably from a hard freeze 2 winters ago. Fixable. Expensive if you did it the wrong way, manageable if you did it the right way. "This is repairable," I said. "Not cheap, but it's repairable." Vivian said nothing for a moment. Then, "Come inside, my daughter is here. She'll want to meet you." I almost said that's not necessary. I had work to do. I had Ren to pick up from school at 3:15. But something in the way she said it made me follow. The kitchen was the kind of room that made you understand what the phrase "built for living" actually meant. Massive windows overlooking the back property. A long farmhouse table with chairs that had clearly been sat in for decades. And standing at the counter, pouring coffee, was a woman who looked nothing like her mother. Where Vivian Crestwood was composed, controlled, made of right angles, this woman was something else. She was maybe 35. Dark hair pulled back in a loose knot, paint on her forearm, a smear of something green near her left elbow. She looked up when I walked in, and her face did what faces do when they're not performing for anyone. Just open, a little surprised, a little curious. "This is the landscaper," Vivian said, as if she were completing an inventory list. The woman set down her coffee. "I'm Selah." She said it directly, looked right at me. "Selah, Crestwood. The greenhouse was mine and my dad's project, so I've been worried about it." "Tucker Greer," I said. "I think I can help." Vivian excused herself. Selah poured me a coffee without asking if I wanted one and sat down at the table and asked me real questions. Not what will this cost and how long will it take. She asked about the heating system, about whether the orchid benches were salvageable, about whether the root damage to the west planting bed was too far gone. She knew the greenhouse. She'd spent time in it. "My dad used to say the greenhouse was the most honest building on the property," she said. "It never pretended to be something it wasn't. If something was wrong, you knew it immediately." I asked how long ago he'd passed. 2 years in April, she said. "It was fast. Heart attack. He was 68 and he was healthy, or we thought he was." She looked out the window. "We weren't ready." I didn't say anything. I knew what not ready felt like. I came back the following Monday to start the assessment. Vivian barely acknowledged me. She opened the gate at the end of the private road via intercom when I called, and I drove up and unloaded my tools and went to work. Selah came out around 10 with a thermos of coffee and asked if she could watch. I told her she could do more than watch. I could use a hand. She was not what I expected. She knew how to use a wrench. Not perfectly, but she wasn't afraid of the work. She asked questions that were good questions. When I pulled the cracked irrigation line out of the east junction and showed her the break, she looked at it for a long moment and said, "My dad would have caught this the first winter if he'd been here to winterize it." Did he usually do it himself? Every year. He had a whole checklist. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that costs something. "We found the clipboard in the potting shed last spring." All his notes. But by then, she didn't finish. I kept working. We didn't talk much after that, but the quiet felt comfortable, the way quiet does when two people are focused on the same thing and neither of them minds. What I didn't expect was Vivian. She appeared at the greenhouse door around noon, and she stood there watching me work for a long moment before she spoke. "I'd like to understand what you're proposing to do here, Mr. Greer, specifically." I walked her through it. New irrigation lines, properly winterized. Repair to the boiler jacket. It was losing heat through a cracked flue fitting, which explained why the heating bills had been monstrous. 3 replacement glass panels on the south face where the original glass had stress cracked. A full cleaning of the remaining panels with a mineral acid solution to restore transparency. Total cost, I told her honestly, somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000 depending on what I found once I got into the boiler room. She listened. She didn't write anything down. "The man who quoted $400,000, I said. "He wasn't lying to you exactly. That's what it would cost to restore this to museum quality, with period-accurate materials, using specialty contractors. But that's not what this greenhouse needs. It needs to work. It needs to grow things again." Vivian looked at me for what felt like a long time. "Fix the greenhouse," she said. "If my daughter decides she still wants you after that, I won't stand in the way." She said it flatly, like a condition she'd already thought through. I didn't know what to say. I looked at Selah, who had gone very still near the potting bench. "Mrs. Crestwood," I started. I'm not joking, Mr. Greer. I'm telling you how I see it. You've been coming here for 2 weeks. My daughter talks about you more than she has talked about anyone in 4 years. I am telling you what the threshold is. That's all." She turned and walked back to the house. I didn't bring it up with Sela that day. We worked until 4, cleaned up, and I drove home to pick up Wren from my neighbor Janet's house where she stayed after school on days I ran late. Wren showed me a drawing she'd made of a stegosaurus wearing a party hat, and I told her it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen, and I meant it. That night I sat on the porch after she went to bed, and I thought about Vivian Crestwood, and the way she said what she said. She wasn't trying to be cruel. I'd met people who were cruel, and it didn't sound like that. She was being transactional. She was used to a world where things had terms and conditions, where agreements were explicit, where nothing was left to chance. What bothered me was not that she said it. What bothered me was that she wasn't entirely wrong about Sela. I had noticed. Of course I had. The way Sela showed up every day I was there. The way she'd started bringing lunch, sandwiches from a place in Weaverville, or soup she made herself once, in a mason jar that she seemed embarrassed to have brought. The way she asked about Wren, and remembered things I'd said about her. The Stegosaurus drawing, I'd mentioned it in passing, and Sela asked about it 2 days later. Did Wren finish the dinosaur? She'd remembered. I was 41 years old. I had learned not to hope for things without thinking them through first. Hope was something you managed carefully when you had a 9-year-old depending on you. But that night on the porch I let myself sit with it. I finished the greenhouse on a Friday in late April. The boiler, the glass, the irrigation lines, the potting benches refinished with teak oil. I'd fixed the humidity calibration on the environmental controls, found that the sensor had been reading 4% below actual, which explained why some of the more sensitive plants had dried out in the final year of Edward's life, a mystery Sela had mentioned that no one had been able to solve. He kept saying the numbers were off, but we assumed it was the plants. It wasn't the plants. I was packing up my tools when Sela came out. She walked the length of the greenhouse slowly, the way you walk through a place that holds memories. She stopped at the orchid bench where I'd repotted the 3 surviving plants. All else had died, but 3 had hung on, and I'd arranged them the way she told me her father used to arrange them, with the tallest in the center. She stood there for a while and didn't say anything. Then she said, "There's something I want to show you." She led me to the far end of the greenhouse, to a wooden storage cabinet I'd noticed but hadn't opened. It was latched but not locked, and I'd assumed it was her family's personal storage. She opened it. Inside was a shelf of labeled glass jars, seed stock, organized alphabetically in Edward Crestwood's handwriting. Below that, a stack of notebooks, and leaning against the back wall in a simple silver frame, a photograph. A man in work clothes, younger than the photos I'd seen of Edward Crestwood in the house, standing in this greenhouse when it was new, or newer, anyway, the plants smaller, the glass clean. He had his arm around a girl of maybe 6 or 7, who was holding a small clay pot with something green in it, looking at the camera with an expression of total seriousness. "That's him," Sela said. "And that's me. I was 6, he just let me plant my first cutting." She picked up one of the notebooks. "These are his greenhouse journals. He kept one every year. I didn't know they were in here. My mother said she couldn't find them after he died." She opened it to a page near the middle, and I could see the handwriting. Precise, patient, the handwriting of an engineer. She pointed to a line without reading it aloud, then handed me the notebook. March 14. S came out today and asked why the orchids bloom in winter instead of spring. I told her, because they do what they need to do on their own schedule, not ours. She didn't think that was a good enough answer. She gets that from me. Sela looked away. I handed the notebook back carefully. "He would have liked you," she said, not looking at me, still facing the shelf. He had no patience for people who pretended to know things they didn't, but he had a lot of patience for people who actually worked. I didn't say anything for a moment. "Sela." I said her name and she turned. "I heard what your mother said. I want to be straightforward with you about something." "Tucker, let me finish." I leaned against the potting bench. "I'm a landscaper from Asheville. I drive a truck with a dent in the passenger door that I keep meaning to fix. I've got a 9-year-old who thinks stegosauruses are underrated and who is, fair warning, going to want to talk to you about that. At length if you ever meet her." "I'm not." I paused. I'm not what your mother pictures when she pictures her daughter's life. Sela looked at me for a long moment. My mother, she said carefully, pictures my father every time she looks at this greenhouse. And my father was a man who built things with his hands before he built anything else. She crossed her arms. He started as a carpenter's apprentice. Did you know that? He used to say the first thing he ever built that he was proud of was a bookshelf. Not a hotel, not a winery, a bookshelf. I hadn't known. She's not testing you, Tucker. She's protecting herself. She's been protecting herself for 2 years, and she doesn't always know the difference between protection and... She stopped. She's not easy, I know that. She told me to fix the greenhouse, and then you could decide. I know what she said. Sela's voice was quiet but direct. She says things like that. It's how she processes the world. Conditions and thresholds. A pause. But I'm 36 years old and I make my own decisions. The late afternoon light was coming through the south glass, the panels clear now, and the whole greenhouse felt different than it had 6 weeks ago. Warmer, like something had come back. I'd like to take you and Wren to breakfast, she said. Saturday, if she likes that kind of thing. She likes pancakes, I said. She will also tell you everything she knows about the Cretaceous period. You don't have to engage with all of it. Sela really smiled, not the careful kind. I'm a fast learner. We went to breakfast that Saturday at a place in downtown Asheville called the Over Easy. Red vinyl booths and bottomless coffee and the kind of pancakes that come in a stack of 4 and need 2 hands. Wren sat across from Sela and within 11 minutes had explained the difference between a herbivore and an omnivore, the correct pronunciation of Pachycephalosaurus, and her theory that the meteor that killed the dinosaurs was, in her words, really not fair. Sela listened to all of it, not politely, actually listened, and asked actual questions, and when Wren said her favorite dinosaur was the Ankylosaurus because it was basically a tank but a nice one, Sela said that was the most reasonable thing she'd heard in weeks. Wren looked at me and said, very seriously, Dad, I like her. I said I did too. I want to tell you that Vivian Crestwood came around quickly and graciously. I want to tell you she saw the light and we all had a warm dinner together and everything resolved neatly. That's not quite how it went. She remained formal with me for most of that spring. She did not come to the greenhouse anymore while I was finishing up the final details. She did not ask about Wren. She spoke to me when spoken to, and she was polite in the way that some people use politeness as a form of distance. But then something happened in May. I was driving up the lane one afternoon to drop off the final invoice and pick up a piece of equipment I'd left in the potting shed. Sela was at her studio in town. Vivian was, as far as I knew, in the house. But she was in the greenhouse. She didn't hear me come in through the side door. She was standing at the orchid bench, and she had one of Edward's notebooks open in her hand, the one Sela had found in the cabinet. She was reading it, and she was crying. Not dramatically, not with noise, just the quiet kind of crying that happens when you're alone and you think you are. I backed out of the door before she saw me. I sat in my truck for a few minutes. Then I got out, walked to the main door of the greenhouse, knocked twice on the glass loudly enough for her to hear, and waited several seconds before I pushed it open. Vivian was at the potting bench when I came in, notebook closed in her hands, eyes dry, or almost dry. Mr. Greer, she said, Mrs. Crestwood. I held up the invoice. Just dropping this off. And I left a soil thermometer in the back cabinet. I'll grab it and get out of your way. She nodded. I went to the cabinet, got the thermometer. When I turned around, she was still standing at the bench, looking at the orchids. He wrote about the humidity sensor, she said, not turning around. In the notebook. He wrote about it last February. He said he thought the reading was off, but he couldn't find the calibration manual. A pause. He was right. He was, I said. He was right about a lot of things. Her voice was controlled, but just barely. He would have... She stopped. Started again. He would have liked you. That's the part I find difficult. I didn't know what she meant exactly, but I thought I understood. He's not replaceable, I said. I know that. Nobody is trying to replace him. Vivian Crestwood turned and looked at me for a long moment. In the clear afternoon light coming through the restored glass, she looked older than she had when I first met her. Or maybe just less defended. She hasn't been happy in a long time, she said. My daughter, she's been here, and she's been available, and she's been going through the motions. Since Edward. We both have been. A pause. She's been different since you started coming here. I didn't say anything. I am not good at this, Vivian said. Asking for something. From someone I can't evaluate. You don't have to evaluate me, Mrs. Crestwood. Vivian, she said. It sounded like it took effort, Vivian. I held the soil thermometer in both hands and said the truest thing I knew how to say. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that I'm not going anywhere, and I know that your daughter is someone worth sticking around for. And Wren thinks so too, and Wren has better judgment than I do. Something ifted in Vivian's face. Not a smile exactly, but the thing that comes before a smile in people who don't smile easily. Your daughter, she said. Sela mentioned she likes dinosaurs. At length, I said. I have 3 books on natural history in the library, Vivian said. From when the children were young. They're quite good. She set the notebook down on the potting bench. If she'd like to borrow them. That was 8 months ago. I'm not going to stand here and tell you everything is perfect. Vivian and I are not friends exactly. We're something more like cautious neighbors who've agreed the fence between the properties is unnecessary. Sela and I are figuring it out in the way 2 people figure things out when they're both a little worn down by life and a little careful with hope, which is to say, slowly, honestly, with more conversation than either of us expected to need. Wren borrowed the natural history books. She returned them with a handwritten list of corrections where she disagreed with the paleontology, which Vivian found, as far as I can tell, genuinely delightful. The orchids in the greenhouse bloomed in January. 3 of them, right on schedule, because they do what they need to do on their own schedule, not ours. I think about that sometimes, about all the things that bloom when you finally fix what's been broken and let in some light. There's probably something in your life like that greenhouse, something that's been sitting, not quite dead, but not living either, waiting for someone to show up and do the work. I don't know what it is for you, but if you know what it is, I hope you don't wait.